Hello and welcome to Catching Up with Council. I'm your host, Dan Monroe. On today's show, we're talking about changes to the budget process. I am pleased to welcome back as my guest, Council President and Ward 6 Councilman Blaine Griffin. Council President, thank you so much for joining me.
Dan, thank you so much to you and TV20 for hosting us. It's a very important session that we believe the public needs to know about.
Now, I know there are some changes to the budget process, but kind of take us back and how was the budget run before and how was that all set up before the new changes?
So the way that the budget used to come to us is we would get a copy of the budget on February the 1st. Then we would, get a week or so to do our retreats to really try to digest the budget. And then by the time hearings came, CDBG hearings would come first and then the general fund budgets would come. We would actually have these marathon sessions where we would try to fit 20 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. And, we decided that we wanted to change it. By law, the budget is given to us by February the 1st, but it has to be passed by March the 31st and under state law. So that's the reason why we try to work so hard. And what we would do is after we would have approximately about 2 weeks of hearings, then we would have reconciliation where there'll be things that council believes that we might need to cut or things that we might need that we feel we need to add. Or so we have to get together with the administration. We have to reconcile. Council's responsibility, because a lot of people need to understand civics better. Council's responsibility, the number one priority is to handle the budget. Our job is responsible for making sure that we oversee the budget, budgeting for the city of Cleveland and make sure that we have a good, solid, strong budget. Number two, it's oversight, making sure that the department is operating the way that, it should, and that they have enough bodies, that they have enough people, that they have enough equipment. And then last but not least, to be innovative and try to find policy and, do legislation that, creates change in policy and those kind of things, like we did with our lead safe ordinance and our tax abatement policy and other things like that. What this process will move us towards will give us a better insight on trying to do all of those things in one. And I can explain that to you this more.
Well, yeah, let's break all this down. So what are the new changes that are going to take into effect and when does all this start?
So it's already started. We're in the process right now of several committee hearings. I'd urge everyone to watch TV20 or our YouTube channel with Cleveland City Council. And they're already starting. So what I've charged each committee chair to do is to do the operational part right now. So their job is to look at the operations, hear and digest what the administration is, sharing with us regarding the operations, how many widgets they're building, how many lots are they cutting, how many calls for service, how much does it cost for, a unit cost for an officer. Because then, let's say police, for example, if we feel like we don't have enough police, then we could say operationally, this is what we think needs to be added to the budget in order to make sure that we have the appropriate bodies or equipment or the amount of money that can fund them. Because what we want to shift to is we want to make sure that we do the operational side and the oversight side now. And then what we could do is we can move to the financial side and focus on the budgeting side in February. That will cut down on a tremendous amount of time because before, like I said, we were trying to fit 20 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. So it wasn't working because you were trying to get operational questions in and understand the budgetary process at the same time. And this gives each chair and each committee member to be more engaged with the operational process, that they can understand the tedious details of departments so that they can understand how it's supposed to be working so that we can really make recommendations and changes budgetarily before the administration sets their budget process next year.
So you kind of just talked about my next question. So the mayor still has to have his budget due by February 1st, and everything that happens with that budget, with all those meetings, still happens as usual.
Well, what we wanted to do, yes, those budget hearings will be as usual. However, the difference is we are getting input up front. The mayor and his team are working on their budgets now for next year, for 2024. So now we're ordering the sandwich that we want, not the sandwich that we're given to us and then reconstructing it. So now what we get an opportunity to do is we're going to start, delving in on the front end and really focusing on the front end and saying, after this process where all the chairs have these committees, here are the recommendations that we believe you need to add in this budget. You may need to add more contractors for lawn cutting. You may need to add, we know we need more police officers. You may need to cut back in this department or on this in this area, because quite frankly, some other area can cover that. So those are things that we have a chance to look at operationally that helps us be more fiscally accountable for where and how we think the taxpayer dollars should be done.
Now, of course, Council President, change doesn't happen overnight. Did you look back at right after last year's budget, everything that went through with that, and did you go with your fellow council persons and say, what can we do to make this quicker, make this easier, make this less strenuous, I guess?
We've always looked at how we could do things different, but I tell people, change is a process, not an event. So just because we change something doesn't mean it's always going to be perfect. We just felt that we wanted to be more proactive and we wanted more input on the front end. Let me say this. I have some very great, young, talented council members, and they have a lot of great ideas. A lot of them go through that budget very studiously. And what they have done is, sometimes they'll crunch numbers and everything and say and then what we found ourselves doing is trying to almost have, 17 different ideas of how we change line item budgets. It can't work that way. So what we want to do is really try to put the onus on the chairs. So then that way we can come out of it with a clear set of recommendations on where we want more and better investments for our different departments.
And I got to think too for the council members, when they go into the budget process and through February and January through February, they'll have more of a clear head because they have a lot of that back information already with them, and it can really move ahead easily.
The more you know, the best you can deliver. A lot of times, people get a book and then, people just basically accept what's in the book. But once again, this council doesn't do that. This council really, really believes that we take our job of legislative body very serious, and that oversight process and that budgeting process very serious. So we want to really, really, like I said, give as much input on the front end and have as much debate on the front end. So when we come to the table in February, it's all about numbers. We'll just sit back and make sure that we understand if the numbers fit our recommendations, or the administration may have an explanation on why it doesn't fit, and that'll be their opportunity to help explain us. But our council is very aggressive as far as what we want, with housing inspectors, with health inspectors to actually go and inspect some of these deplorable establishments that serve food to our community. We want to make sure that people are keeping our housing stock up by doing proper housing inspection. We definitely need more police. We need more rec workers. But at the same time, we need the money to do it. So we're going to look and say, and have a sober look that these are the operations that we need beefed up. But then the administration's job is to say, okay, well, here's the revenue that we have, and we have to make some tough decisions.
After this is all said and done, are you going to revisit all the changes that made and see what worked and see what didn't, and keep implementing tweaks here and there?
We always want to do that. Mm-hmm. There's no panacea to what we're trying to do. Once again, this is our opportunity. A lot of people don't realize this about council, but we have about probably 2/3 of council have 5 years or less experience. And even me as the council president, I have approximately 6 to 7 years of experience. So the reason I'm saying that to you is because past councils that after you look at your 10th budget and after you look at your 12th, 15th budget, kind of get used to it and kind of like, know what's going on. Well, because we have an influence and an influx of so many new members and new ideas, it's also good for them to get acclimated because they want to see some change and they want to see the city operate different and be more efficient as well. So this gives them an opportunity to really kind of start to put their stamp of approval and their imprint on it as opposed to just accepting it.
So the meetings are going on now.
Yes.
The committees. How is that going? Are you seeing good production coming from these meetings? Are you seeing good energy from the council? Or?
I think it's good both ways. I think that the administration is hearing, and they have a better understanding of what are council priorities, which helps give them a heads up and heads off any potential problems. But then I also believe that the council is really learning a lot about, the intricacies of all the departments, and the council people can tell you, you can tell what you want from a office building, but a council person that's on the ground every day can tell you everything that needs to happen with these departments, because they'll see the high grass, they'll see the abandoned homes, they'll see the lack of response from police or EMS if that's the case. And those are the things that we really want to make sure that we drill down on, so that when we come to the money side, we can say, well, if it costs $107,000 a year to have a police officer, then if we want 15 or 20 extra police officers, this is how much it's going to cost. When you add in overtime, PRS, fringe benefits, everything else, that's how we want to make sure that we start looking at that. Like, okay, here's where we want to beef it up. That's fine. But here's how much it's going to cost in order to do that. And in order for that to happen, you're going to have to make cuts, or you have to pull money from somewhere in order to make that happen.
I think it's important to reiterate what you just said, because yes, you're making changes to the budget process, but people should know the charter is the charter. And so, again, nothing can change what the mayor does. Nothing can change with when the budget gets delivered or when you hold the meetings.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and that's what I tell everybody, is that we're, I know everybody just sees City Hall and they think we're all one big body. It's a separation of powers here. And yes, our job is to make sure that the budget's intact. And like I said, we hear from our constituents. One of the things that I inform my constituents is that at my community meeting in Ward 6 is that I want them to watch Channel 20. I want them to see these hearings. The ones that have the ability, whether they can watch them online at our Cleveland City Council YouTube page, or whether they can watch them on TV 20. I really want them to get a flavor of what these departments do, because sometimes they come to us and they have expectations because they don't know. And all they understand is, their council person, that's the relationship that they have. But if they understand how city departments operate, it will help them have a better understanding to articulate what they believe is feasible and to happen in their community as well.
You said something interesting, your constituents, you're a council person, and you hear from your constituents almost all the time. Does that help with the other council people, what they hear from their residents of how budget moves forward?
Well, I tell you what I try to do, Dan. I really try hard to educate, the constituents. I was fortunate to work under some very bright people. Of course, Mayor Jackson, the former mayor of the city of Cleveland, but also Fannie Lewis. Fannie Lewis, who was a master of educating her community on how municipal government operates and how the money moved. And I try hard to help my constituents understand that, because, sometimes people, in this business, you have to tell people, no, we can't afford it, or we can't do something. And people say, why? Or they'll say, well, you're giving all that money to this specific neighborhood. Why can't we get more money? Why can't we get this or that? Well, you got to understand how the economics work, and how, what the city does and what the corporate sector does. For example, if I work in some neighborhoods, I'll give you 3 different tiers. If I put $1 in, I might get probably, $15, $20 back on my investment. So the corporate community is going to go there. Then I might have a mid-tier community where if I put $1 in, I might get $8 to $10 back on my investment. Those are mid-market areas where there may be some growth, some economic growth, but there's a tremendous amount of this city, a large amount of this city, that even if I put $1 in, I might only get 50 cents back on my investment. Hence, why we need to look at where we might need to have services and beef up services in a certain area, because where you might have a corporate sector that has more. Let's look at University Circle, for example, has 2 police departments, actually 3 police departments, has several other amenities and other things like that. It gives us the ability to redirect some of those resources other places. So to understand that operationally, so that we can translate that to a fiscal standpoint, is what we're trying to do. So it sounds like a lot of egghead government stuff, but that's what we do.
That's what you have to be done.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should know, or the people watching at home should know, about the changes that are taking place right now?
They should tune in. They should talk to their council person. They should make it known where they would like to see investments. I almost want to put a big billboard throughout the city, several of them saying, where would you like to see the investments? I know that there's groups that want to try to create other committees and shadow governments and other things like that. But quite frankly, the folks of this community elect council members, and they elect council people for representative government. And this democracy, is imperfect as may be, has worked pretty well for several years, several hundreds of years. So quite frankly, I think we have a decent system that can always be improved. But I think that the citizens of this city want services. So the citizens should be calling the council people and say, we'd like to see more investments in streets. We'd like to see more investments in recreation centers. We'd like to see more investments in police officers, because remember, a lot of this is, really going to salaries and payroll. Capital is a whole nother conversation that we'll be having too at some point in time.
Well, Council President, thank you so much. We learned a lot. And I think the message is also the people watching at home, get involved with your city, get involved with your council, ask questions, watch TV 20 Cleveland, watch the city council's YouTube page, watch the programs, and you might just learn a lot. You might learn something new. So Council President, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Catching Up with Council. I'm Dan Monroe. We'll see you next time.